It's the Dev Friday Show with Mark and Tim.
We get the bumper there this time, Mark. You hear a bumper?
I hear the bumper.
All right. Well, at least we got that going for us this week. Completely missed that last week, but you know what? It's always better on the site, right? Because the podcast completely mixed, volume levels normalized, good bumper music, and that's where you want to go, right? What is that? DevFridayShow.com? Is that what that is?
That's correct. And we are getting pretty good at our schedule. I think we should take this. We should become pros, Tim, because we are like releasing the show each week. We're getting on schedule. I think this is
Oh, did you push the latest?
Oh, of course I did.
Of course you did. So last week's show is now online. If you're listening to us live, stop. Like, don't listen to us live. Just turn this off. Go to devfridayshow.com and listen to last week's episode. And then in a week, you'll be able to see what we say today. Because that's really the best way to consume this show. You don't want to do it in real time because it's just too much information. It's just too current, too cutting edge. You need to give it a week, and then what we say, the rest of the world will have caught up with by that time. So that's the pace that we want for this show.
That's right, because we speak the future here on the Dev Friday Show.
That's right. Well, futurist, right? So I feel like we did even less prep than our normal. No prep at all for this show. Maybe it's just
I got online a bit early today.
Oh, that's
I tried to be on top of it because you know me, I like to reset my computers every month. And,
oh boy, did you reinstall everything again or something?
I was having some issues with my computer that I use to record this. It's my standing desk that I use for my class recordings, my lecture videos.
Right.
Near the end of the semester, I was just having some weird issues with it. I wasn't able to run my WSL Windows terminal instance on it. That was irritating me.
That's no good.
Me just a weird error. So I was like, okay, I've been having a little bit of issues with this install. It's been a little bit hacky. Might as well just blow it away. It's the end of the semester. What else do I have to do? So
you reinstalled Windows?
I did. And have you ever used Chocolatey, Tim?
I have no idea what this is, so I'm going to say no.
Chocolatey is a package manager for Windows.
What?
And if you have not tried it, I do highly, highly recommend it. So if you are a fan
How does that work?
Your apt-get on the Debian or the Ubuntu's, and you're used to package managers in the Linux world, Chocolatey is a Windows-based package manager for community packages.
For Windows applications?
Yes. So what I do now is I don't have it set up where...
So no more like download this file and run the installer, run that either MSI file.
That was always just a real pain with Windows, compared to resetting up a
Because you have
Linux.
to trust the uninstaller to uninstall itself, but the truth is that's actually what a package manager does too, but whatever.
Correct. So what I do is I go to Chocolatey, I think it's chocolatey.org. I go to there, I look up its community lists. I think there's a way to kind of make a list of packages that you can then, and I've done this once, you can actually add a series of packages onto a list, and then you can just basically download a script for that list, and then it'll just install everything for you. But I just like going through the community package, like the most popular packages on the list, like every time I reset a computer and just kind of go through it. So if I need to do a new application install, I just do Choco install OBS or Choco install Audacity
from your PowerShell.
For my PowerShell, yes.
PowerShell,
yes.
because you Choco install Google Chrome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this is.
So I pretty much use it for probably about 80 to 90% of the applications now that are installed. Now, there are some applications that do work better. Like, say, if you install through the Windows Store, or maybe if you just install it from the executable itself. But honestly, it does a real good job. And also for management. So if you need to keep track of outdated packages, do Choco outdated. It'll list the outdated packages that have upgrades available. And they do Choco upgrade all. Then it just upgrades all of them.
Yeah, I'm stuck in their wiki now, looking at basically the why. That's what I want to see, why. So this will be interesting to see, because maybe I'm showing the fact that I am more of a Linux user than a core Linux. I compile my OS regularly and all. I don't do that. That's what I'm saying. I'm just a Linux user. I'm like, yeah, it works, and I installed it and it works, right?
You, Mr. Slackware, you.
Yeah. How about that, right? But my understanding of the package managers on Linux operating systems is, well, because that's how we distribute software. We distribute it, and then there's scripts and stuff that are run by the package manager to do the install, because it's not like you have a little double clicky file like you do with Windows and it'll just execute it. But that's, I mean, you're yielding to some extent the installation and the uninstallation of that package to the package manager,
That's
which
correct,
then
yes.
is usually bundled up by the application author. So it's not like there's this better, oh no, because there's historically uninstalling software in Windows, like, did it really uninstall it all? Did it leave something? There's that cruft that gets left behind. You're like, I think I uninstalled all this stuff, but look, there's still like remnants and fragments of it remaining. And then we may think, well, that's because we trusted the application author to do that, and they didn't care about the uninstall routine. Well, I mean, if I'm not mistaken, that's pretty much the same thing with the package manager. You're trusting whoever packaged it up to have cleaned it up the way it should. And that's a lot of times the author of the software. So, it's a different technique. So I'm curious to see what Chocolatey provides. I feel like that's what the Microsoft Store wanted to provide, was essentially that like a GUI package manager.
The one thing I don't like about the Windows Store, which is a little bit obfuscated, and when you deal with like the Pop OS Store, or even on Mac, the Mac App Store, you have on a Mac, you can know when an application needs to be updated. If you open up the App Store, it kind of just tells you. It has like a panel or tab for it, and it's pretty intuitive. But the Windows Store, you actually have to kind of dig through to kind of see what's been updated, or you have to go to a specific, I don't know, it doesn't
bubble up to the top.
It's very strange. Hey, yeah. So that's why I don't like it. So I don't actually install too many applications through the Windows Store unless that's the best way to install it. And also there's
some applications that are pretty much released through the Windows Store,
correct,
right? Because they're, I don't know, it's almost,
so if I want
like a lightweight application.
If I want to install like the Microsoft Whiteboard app, that's a good example of that's primarily distributed through the Windows Store, even though there are other ways you can get it that from different places on the internet. But if you wanted to have the official most updated release, then you would want to get it through the Windows Store. But what I was going to say is that I think the real intent of Chocolatey, if you kind of dig into their site, is really for enterprise management. So for managing installations on for large series of Windows networks and computers, that's a real big hassle, because management software or managing software installs and updates on Windows systems is a real big pain.
Yeah, that's what as I look through like their one article here. Yeah, it definitely feels like that, because they're saying you can integrate with infrastructure management tools, Puppet, Chefs, things like that, to be able to have probably a consistent installation. All right, this is a lab computer. And I mean, there's tools out there that do that, but if you're used to doing that with a package manager, not using, I forget what you'd have to use or maybe you don't even have that, right? Because like that would be in the Windows world, that would be like a domain, and you have to set that up. You have to set up like an Active Directory domain, and then permissions, and then if you're just like, hey, I just want this software on this computer. Okay, I'm seeing it. And you like it.
So as a Windows developer, I think, or just say as a developer coming from the Mac or coming from the Linux world and loving package managers, just because of the simplicity of it, then I think it's a real good option for kind of managing software on the Windows. But one thing, there is a downside about it. It is all community based. So a lot of the packages and the software installs are supported by community members. So you're dependent upon that for updates. So I was saying, like, over the semester when I was Blender likes to push updates pretty frequently. And also the Godot, game engine software I was using, released their new 4.0, I think March or April, something like that, like mid-semester. And it actually took probably about a week or 2 weeks for that update to kind of go into the Chocolatey kind of repo system. In order for me to get that update, I could just gone to the website and just download the update directly. But if I wanted to kind of just maintain it through Chocolatey, I kind of have to wait till the applications are updated on their system. So, but if I'm fine with just waiting a week, then it's not too big of a deal.
And that's common for other package managers too. There's plenty of like Linux packages where they'll tell you, hey, you're a Ubuntu user, don't install it through the package manager, because they, whoever is managing the install in Ubuntu hasn't updated it. Just install it this way. Mm-hmm. Because I don't know. I think Docker was that for a while. In fact, it's still, that's a good question. since I don't know if I don't.
Oh,
Did
Docker. I was doing some Docker last night too.
Yeah,
Yeah, we can get into that.
did we
Yeah.
do? I don't know if I've mentioned that. I'll be going to PHP Tech in a couple weeks. I don't know.
Oh,
if that's
really?
come up. I don't know if that's come up on the show yet. But if it has, and some people may be aware of that. No, but I'm doing the one talk I was talking about a couple weeks ago. Right, going to do a live code of that pretty much. Just kind of show how this library that we put together can be used and do it with live code examples. So the issue is I used to have a development setup where my dev machine was a Linux laptop. And then I had my desktop, which was a Windows desktop, because I've always run both. I shouldn't say always. For much of my recent past, I've run both Windows and Linux together because there's things that I like to do that Windows is great at. Development I love to do on Linux, right? But I used to have my Linux box was my Linux laptop that I develop on, and then I had a Windows desktop. Well, when that all died, the Windows desktop died, I rebuilt a desktop and I rebuilt it for Linux, and I just said I'm going to go with the Surface Pro instead. So I'm traveling, and now my traveling device is a Windows machine. When I do development, like actual development on projects that I work on remotely, I generally either use, say, like a VNC to get back and just actually code on my Linux desktop, or JetBrains has something they call JetBrains Gateway. They also have a couple other technologies, Projector and a few other things, where I can remotely connect to the IDE that runs on my Linux box and the GUIs on my Surface. I don't want to do that for a live code, obviously, right? Like that's not something I want to do. So I want to get Docker, PHP, get a composer, a composer install running that I have that has a PHP container, has an Nginx container. It's my example application. So I need to get Docker on Windows and PHP Storm on Windows running. You're probably the only person, the best person that I know of at this point to talk about with that, right? So how's that going for you?
Well, I've gotten back to Docker because what I've been working on lately is a Next.js application. One of my first portfolio projects that I'm working on this summer for my my journey that we're going to be going on together, Tim, this summer.
I'm excited to get to this topic because I don't even know what a 10x developer is, but I'm interested to see that you're
my goal to be one by the end of the summer, so somebody will hire me.
You're gonna become one. So that
I
did get to that.
I have some projects I'm working on, some portfolio projects I'm working on. And actually, one of them I've talked about before is because one of the last things I want to clean up with the art department, because I still want to get this out the door, is getting the updated art website with more of a portfolio feature for faculty and students.
Right.
So that's what I'm building. I want to kind of finish up that project because that's kind of been lingering. I also think it would be something good to show and talk about. But so I was getting that working. It's a Next.js application. And I was looking to see how I want to host it and develop it. And I want to use Next.js's server-side SSR features using Next.js 13. Run it in also with their app router, the new app directory, and kind of some of the new features that they're using. And I was trying, and I didn't want to. Let's see, there's different platforms I could host, like Vercel, the maker of Next.js, the main primary developer. They have their own platform. And I was thinking, I really kind of want to get back to Amazon Web Services and start to kind of get back into that. I think that would also be some good experience. And also
it's weird that AWS feels like more close to the metal, right?
Yes, that's right. That's right.
It's still virtualization.
That's right.
But it is.
Well,
AWS
the thing about all these services,
Colo.
Now I'm going to go through down many rat holes here. All these services I was looking at are all just built on top of AWS.
Yeah.
So they're
AWS's services are just built on top of AWS.
They're just like nice developer user-friendly layers on top of AWS, and then they charge you a little bit extra for that. Now, a lot of these services, like I was talking about last week, Supabase, which is something I was using a lot in my classes
right.
This semester, they have a lot of these services that are built on top of AWS have really great free or hobby plans that if you just have one or two projects, it's very the traffic or resources that this project includes is very light. It's a really low or no cost option to kind of get started with. It's really nice. But once you start seeing, if you intend to build an application, you want to start to scale it, and you feel like, okay, if I actually want to make a business out of this application and eventually get users onto it, it's good. The cost is going to start to tick up there, because that's the way those businesses are designed. They try to get you in the door, try to give you a really, really great experience for free, get you hooked. And then once you actually get some traffic, get some users, then it'll start to pick up the cost there. But if you go close to the metal, like we were talking about with AWS, which is basically what these platforms are built on, then you can, I don't know. I was thinking about the setting expectations for, yes, you can still start cheaply, setting your budgets, and then kind of know a little bit more confident how you can scale it from a cost perspective. I don't know. So I want to kind of get back into AWS because it's been a while since I was a little bit closer to the metal on the cloud. I guess, what does that call? It's not close to the metal.
No, it's
closer
not.
to the cloud.
Closer to the cloud?
Closer to the cloud, right?
Is that the core of the cloud? Or I don't know. Yeah.
So I was looking at their services, and I've been using Firebase. You know that Firebase, Google Cloud a lot for most of my static applications.
Amazon has their version
websites.
Of that too. Right?
So Amplify is their version of Firebase. So that's what I was looking at. And for just doing static website hosting, pushing it on for that, I think it works really great. I did try to get a Next.js application working on it, and it's fine for if you don't want to use, let's say, the app router, the app directory, or the API routes that some of the new features that the framework has. It's not compatible with that yet. So if you want to use some of the new features, then you have to do it a different way. So this leads me into, okay, then maybe I need to Dockerize this or Dockertize this. Is that the right way to pronounce that? So take my application, make a Docker image out of it, run it in a container,
and then ECS.
Using their, have you heard about their yes.
No.
Well, ECS, I guess it's like the Fargate, which is a really cool
Amazon
name.
Fargate,
I think. Which is kind of like they're more of an automated, I guess, ECS kind of version of it.
I've seen some of the stuff come out. It was never something that I used when I was having to do more of that. Now I don't have to do that. So I just kind of tangentially know a little bit of what it's doing. But yeah.
So using kind of ECS, their container system, but then using Fargate on top, which is basically kind of an automated, kind of more simplified kind of setup for that. Which
is what I meant by like AWS stuff is built on AWS. They just keep saying, "Oh, you know what? This is the." I see you really want S3 and ECS and a load balancer all put together, so we'll just call that another product.
Well, which that's what Amazon, Google, Microsoft. That's what they do. They see how developers are using their platforms.
Yeah.
And they're building systems on top of their systems. It's like, well, they're building these great developer experiences. Why can't we just do that ourselves and get the developers on our system sooner? Which I was seeing articles that's actually become more of a thing over the past year. How Amazon and Google and Microsoft are starting to build nicer, user-friendly features for developers into their platforms, and so they're just going directly to the platform instead of going to these other services.
Love or hate Microsoft. Microsoft has actually, we should get Steve Ballmer out here, right? Just to start screaming developers. Microsoft has very much been a developer focused company from the start. They realize the importance of that. And then, I think AWS, they just say, this would be easier for you to use it if we configured it this way. Sure, we can make it configured that way. And many times AWS doesn't even add anything extra for that, right? It's like, what's the cost? Well, the cost is just the underlying resources that you're using. The cost for orchestrating this is just, the cost to spin up to the EC2 instance, the cost, and then if you're transferring large amounts of data, you got the transfer, but it's just what you use. We just made it easier for you to configure. So I think they're doing a lot of good work there, and it's not like they're trying to extract more value from the developers or saying, all right, we're going to give you this, it's going to be nicer, and now we're going to charge a little bit more. That's just like, no, we just made it easier for you to do something. We automated something a lot of people are doing, so you can get to actually accomplishing what you want to accomplish faster. So, but you're looking at launching like a Dockerized type application up on Fargate.
So the first thing I'm going to do, I just want to have proof of concept. Like, okay, do I have the development kind of pipeline set so I can actually start to I do have something functionality done, but then think about, okay, I want to figure out the deployment process. I want to get that out of the way, because I hate the fact of like, that's always like a lingering thing. And also I want to also test it out in a very simplified, almost greenfield project where I don't really have to deal with too many kind of dependencies or anything like that. So I was setting this up, and of course I have to do this in a mono repo with turbo repo, because why not? Because I want to plan for the future, Tim. Right? Why do a single repo?
This is a mono repo for your one application, though, right? Yes. You're not like throwing every application you're working on into a single.
Well, because for this application, actually, what my end goal is, once I get the web app online, then I actually do want to build like a React Native application for this. For students and faculty to like to have an app they could like upload images to.
Yeah.
So they could take pictures, upload images to, so they can kind of build their portfolio easily with with their phone.
But it's all your portfolio site. You're like,
Correct.
oh yeah, we've got a React Native app in here that's for the
Yeah.
portfolio site. We have a website that's for the portfolio site.
Correct.
We have our configuration and probably some things that we're doing.
So I
like
have
if you're
at
building containers.
At minimal, I'll have like 3 different applications. So I'll have a web app. It's gonna be the front end application, or actually 4 actually for like an admin component of that,
Oh, okay.
an API, and then eventually the React Native.
Right? And you'll
so that's
separate those out, right?
Yes, within the same repo. I want to keep
the admin.
Keep it all within the same repo. So I'm intending, okay, I got to do this one in the mono repo because that's where I want to go with this. So I kind of have all the big pieces in place, but how do I Dockertize this? Using Docker. It's been a while since I was using Docker. So I was starting, okay, so if I want to have multiple applications, then I have to do the Docker compose. I have to have a compose file that then could list out my separate Docker files in each one of my applications inside the mono repo. Okay, I saw where the connections are made. And then
then some of your applications that might be even more than one container.
Correct.
Maybe. Like my perspective, I have a real simple PHP API. It's 2 containers because I have PHP FPM and Nginx as my web server, right? Because each one's a process. Yeah. Now you can run like a weird thing where it's Apache with PHP. That's to me not the intent of Docker, is not to be running multiple processes. But if you have a database too, database is a process, right? That's another container.
Well, the nice thing you could do with the Docker Compose, you can set up a network, which I was just learning about too.
Right, yeah. Because you don't have to think about putting all this on a. You're like, no, I've got a MySQL server over here, spin up on itself. I know you'll use Supabase, right? I've got my Supabase container running over here, and then I've got whatever. What are you're gonna write? Next.js? Is that what you're gonna use for the server side?
Yeah.
So you got Next.js running there, and then you put them on a network and say they can communicate together. Maybe they don't expose anything to the public. Supabase wouldn't, right? Or maybe it would, because I don't know if you're going to use that. Are you going to use Supabase from the client to actually interact with it directly?
That's a really interesting, because I was also looking to the self-hosting. I don't think for time purpose, I'm not going to do the self-hosting option right now.
Oh, you're just going to use Supabase.
I'm just going to use Supabase.com. But I do like that option of rolling that into the mono repo as a self-hosted instance, as a container that I could then deploy.
You could do that for dev if you want.
Yeah, that's down the road. I definitely should take a look at that. That sounds fun once I could start to get a little bit more confident in this Docker world. But the biggest issue I had, and I know I've had some big issues. I've asked you to review my Docker files to see why they're not working. I got it working, especially with some of the starter template Docker files that Next.js was recommending. But the biggest issue I had, and you probably haven't dealt with this too much, maybe on the PHP side with your composer, but the biggest issue I had was just dealing with the package managers. Like I prefer to use PNPM, which is it's a faster NPM version, and then I also like to use Yarn, but I couldn't get PNPM to work on it, and also once I got Yarn, I was able to get up building in and get all the packages, but that was taking forever, and then unless I upgrade up to the newest version, which is Yarn, their Berry version. So I was eventually able to get it to where it was efficient. It built the Docker image, installed the packages.
And you're talking about using the package managers inside the container when you're building
huge pain with that. Yeah, because it was just getting some weird errors, just saying it's just weird. So I didn't know. Have you ever had like weird issues, like dependencies you're trying to bring into a Docker image? Have you ever had any weird?
I don't do a lot of that anymore. For my example, I'm just saying I want the plain PHP 8 FPM image, and I want Xdebug on it. So I'm like running 2 commands that already exist in that container, because the PHP container. Sorry, I'm sorry, I'm using language incorrectly, and I should know better. The PHP image has those utilities already there. The PHP image is built in such a way to say, oh, you want to then build your own image that has different PHP extensions or configuration. Yeah, we've got tooling built right into the image to let you do that. So I don't have to pull down like a package manager and be like, oh, apt install this. I mean, maybe I did if there's some things that I want, but the PHP image is built to say, oh, you want Xdebug? Just there's a way to say enable the Xdebug extension. We have that all set, and then now you've got Xdebug. So my image, like my Docker file, is it was from PHP FPM whatever the tag is, and then execute 2 commands, which install Xdebug, and I think I do a little thing to configure it the way I want it. That's it, because I don't need anything else there now. But if you're having to say I'm guessing you're going to take like the node container. the node image, and then on that install Next.js and some other. So I mean, my gut would be like, is there an official Next.js image that is really tuned and ready to say like, hey, whatever dependencies you need to make me work?
It's interesting. They had a monorepo Docker file example, and I used as a starting point, but that even ran some errors. And I was like, I had to kind of do some adjustments with the package manager. So I had to switch to like a newer version of Yarn, because also I had to remove. They had like an API with some like test unit tests set up with it, and that was just.
So you had to add a newer version of Yarn to the container or to the image.
Well, that was because that was just to make it more efficient. No, that wasn't cause of the problem. Like I was having a real just to build the image was taking like, I don't know, I was doing it at the coffee shop.
Oh, that
I was doing it on my laptop, but it was like taking like 15 minutes to build. This is crazy.
No.
Nothing should take 15 minutes. Like unless I'm like rendering like a 3D movie on my laptop. Nothing that I'm building software should take that long.
That I've seen.
Or if I'm building in the Unreal Engine, that takes like an hour.
Is for sometimes building like a container that has NPM dependencies, it takes so long. Yeah. And I think it has something to do with the way that NPM caches stuff and making sure that however it's caching, where it's caching. And again, I've not dug into this. I know we've tried to solve some things in our dev build to make it faster. But the trick is making sure it's cached in such a way that Docker can understand them as the layers that they use for building. So yeah, the first time it might take 15 minutes, but hopefully the next time it's much faster, because you can say, oh, I'm not installing anything new, or making sure you structure your run commands in such a way that the dependencies that you are not going to change frequently are installed in one way, so that layer can be just cached. And you can just say, oh, just use that, start from that base. But I think we had to do some intentional things to make sure whatever NPM keeps as their cache for installs was also cached in the image. So we weren't doing that every single time. But yeah, I remember there being some issues there that I think we figured out.
So the speed issue, I was, as long as I upgrade up to the node version 3.14, the latest version, which you could just do node set version Barry, which is like just as the latest version. And because that uses a different system, how it basically links these into like a zip file, then kind of combines all the required packages together, and how it does a link is a little bit more efficient. So once I did that on my machine, and then did it also in the Docker file to make sure it did in the when it created the image, that seemed to solve the kind of the performance issue. So I was able to kind of get it eventually working, right? But it was interesting, like starting on that last night, and then finishing up this morning, getting back into that world, especially if you haven't done it for that long time, just understanding how to put together a Docker file, or you even doing the Docker Compose instead of multiple images or managing multiple containers. When you want to bring them up to manage them, it's definitely a different world for doing, especially from client side development. That we mostly do so.
But but I don't even have it set up yet. Do I still have to with WSL2?
So yes, that's what I was going to get to. So the way that I'm running it, I'm only doing through WSL. I'm not doing the Windows Docker desktop.
That's what I was going to add. Yeah. Because they finally, I think, released Docker desktop for Linux. And I'm like, I'm not touching that.
No, just run on the WSL train. It runs so,
because you can install Docker without Docker desktop.
It's just Ubuntu.
WSL2, right?
Yeah, it's Ubuntu inside of Windows. It's like amazing. I'm doing all my development through the Windows terminal, either using Tmux. I run a do Emacs client, GUI client through on Ubuntu, and it's super fast. And if I would have run those applications like kind of natively on Windows, because they're not really made for Windows, it's slow, it's clunky.
My understanding is, yes, for Docker too, like there's this weird disconnect where once you have Docker desktop installed, it's like, oh well, maybe do you have two versions of it running? Is it running twice now?
Yeah, I don't touch that at all. I just have it installed just like you would normally set up Docker with on your and with your package manager on Ubuntu, and I just run it like through
this there. Is the I don't know anything about anything here, right? Like WSL2, is that just launching PowerShell? How do I get into this Ubuntu
what
thing?
I recommend, make sure you have Windows Terminal. You should have Windows Terminal installed.
Okay.
So get that installed, because then you could boot up multiple shells. So if you want to do PowerShell, or if you want to do Ubuntu, or if you want to do Kali Linux, or some of the images that are available that you could set up with WSL. It gives you a nice interface for that. And Windows Terminal has gotten really, really good. I think it's actually.
I just run a terminal that then gives me a Ubuntu shell.
Yeah, that's all.
What about the file sharing? Because I'm going to be running Storm, and I'm going to want Storm to be able to do things with well, honestly, for my use, I'm not developing the way that I would normally develop. It's for a live code thing. So
So
I don't necessarily need Storm to work the way it would.
So the way that I did, because I was doing that a little bit during the semester, because when I was editing my Godot projects for class on through my Tmux, Vim, Emacs editor, kind of my workflow, because I kind of just prefer that. So what I was doing is just there's a mount to your Windows directory. So you just mount to it. It's already mounted. You already have it available to you, unless you want to do like an extra drive. I had to do like a couple. There's a WSL command you could do.
You mount the Linux.
If you have if you have an external drive
volume as a
or
drive.
If you want to mount to a specific folder to a specific place within WSL, there's definitely a command, and I have that saved. So I was doing that, but if you just want to just access your primary drive, that is your Windows installation.
Yeah, I just need the IDE to be able to see.
You just
the code.
Yeah, just create a symlink. That's all it is.
So it's going to symlink from what would be my repository in my Ubuntu install on WSL2. I'm going to symlink that to something in Windows that then I tell Storm, hey, there's my code. The thing that probably would be an issue for me, but not for a live demo is like I run unit tests with Storm. I just hit a button in Storm and it executes the Docker command. I feel like that might be hard, unless maybe, I don't know. I've not played with it yet. I'm guessing PHP Storm may know how to interact with WSL2.
Well, that's true, which I haven't done any work with. Did a little bit with VS Code, because VS Code has a nice WSL integration, because it's Microsoft,
right?
But I'm assuming, was it with the latest? Most of the JetBrains stuff I was using was Android Studio, which I wasn't doing too much with WSL for that. So yeah, I'm sure they do.
Yeah,
I haven't played with that myself.
Take a look at it. But yeah, that's kind of my next step. Is I've got the code, I've got the change. In the past, I've done talks where I go in and I actually write the code, but I think here I'm just going to take it as let's look at these commits. So we'll kind of bring up the diff and we'll talk through. We change this, we change this, we change this. You see how that works? And look, it still works. So I want to at least be able to hit the button and make the request of my API and see it come back. But that should not be a problem, because I'll be running it locally. Storm will see the files locally, and Storm will execute the HTTP request. Storm doesn't care whether it's locally or not. Just like, if you can make this request, I'll make it. So I think I'll be fine. But yeah, that's my thing. I got to get done next week to make sure I'm ready to go for that. Yeah, after doing a lot of code demos in my classes this semester, my preferred way is to have it pretty much completed. You were using
and I did Copilot, enjoy I did enjoy using Copilot to do some completely from scratch demos. And if they're small demonstrations, it's not too much code, it's definitely to work there. But if I'm doing trying to demo like an Android application that has 10 files, a good number of lines in each one of those files, to type that all within an hour, 2 hour class, it's impossible, even with Copilot. But I was fine. My preferred way to do it, pretty much have a complete application, but then have areas of the application where you're gonna want to modify, tweak a little bit. That's what I'm doing. I'm starting with an API, and then kind of hinting at, well, here's some of the issues with just using the standard interface for a request and response. I would love to have a different method here. How would I introduce that? But even instead of doing that code even live to say, oh, this is how I'd introduce it, I'm just going to pull up a diff, because with all the times that I've done, these type of things, I don't think anybody learns from watching me type. But what they do learn, in my observation, is by seeing the one version of the code and then seeing the change. So it's not, it's not that they learn from watching me type the change, but understanding the change, being able to see, okay, we're changing this. This is a new thing that we're introducing. We're adding this class, and now this thing is going to implement that. Oh, and that allows us to add this method. That's convenient. I see that. So I'm thinking that most of the value is going to be there by just saying, I've made commits for each of these changes. So instead of a slide that shows you the change, there's a commit, and we'll just look at it in the diff editor, because that's a great way to go. So it's, instead of a live demo, it's a live code review of code that I already wrote to show the changes and to show, oh, this is the progression of, we leverage this library to add this convenience method. And then we realize, wait, if we're going to do that, we could also just change this over here. And then kind of progressively show it. So instead of 5 slides, it's 5 commits. Instead of you seeing code on a slide, you're going to see code in a diff viewer. And then you'll actually be able to, I'll be able to verify, look, hit refresh, works just fine. Hit the API again. There's no change here.
we simplified our code, and and I didn't write any unit test for it because it's example code. The unit test is essentially hitting the API with an HTTP client and saying, did it give you back the response you wanted? And we'll just do that. I like to call that refresh testing, which is where you just like make the request and see, does the page show what you want it to show? Because we all do testing, right? And it's like, why didn't you automate that? If now you're saying every time you make a change, you have to log into your app and hit refresh. Well, in this case, it's because that's the best way to explain it in a talk, is to actually hit refresh and not say, trust me, the unit test covers this. But if it was real code and this was not something you're trying to explain, then yes, a unit test would be better.
I like that idea
because the API.
It does give you a good kind of real world kind of experience, or kind of a walkthrough like you would do like on a team.
Yeah.
Right. When you're viewing somebody else's code and you want to diff it. Yeah, I think that's a good kind of real world example, instead of just kind of doing a nice kind of slide presentation of showing, okay, here's the block of code, and then here sliding in the next block of code next to it, and doing
that's
something like that.
That's another thing for me. I don't know what it is, but it's like, if I'm going to do a reasonably technical talk, not this high level, how you think about things. And because we're doing one of those too, we're talking about just how in general we view APIs and hypermedia. And I was going to do the hypermedia in 60 seconds thing to see if I could do that today. Right. And that's all visual. And I'll probably post to some social medias, like the visual of that, because we've got the slide done like my normal slides. It is one page, and then we just zoom over the whole thing to show relationships and all that. So we've got what looks to be an infographic of a talk. And I think that's a good way to convey that information. But if I'm going to start talking about, well, this is how we actually do it, instead of putting code on a screen, I almost inherently don't trust it, because you can't exercise code on a screen in a presentation, right? I want to see it in an IDE where you can hit a button and show me it work. I want to see the input. I want to see the output. I want to see it working, because if I don't see it working, you can tell me all day that that's how it works and that it works, but I want to see it working. And I feel like that resonates better with the audience, because I feel like it resonates with me. So why wouldn't it resonate with other developers to be like, oh yeah, that's a nice, you showed me the interface on the screen. I can see how it works. Yeah. Show it to me in a real world situation where you're actually using it.
And you're also giving them like a link to the code, like a repo.
Yeah. It'll be it's already on my GitHub profile. So we'll have that. I'm going to throw a README in there that's going to be effectively my notes for the talk. The things that I'll go through, so they'll be able to come back and look at it and see how it works. And if they even weren't at the talk, they'll be able to probably benefit from it as well.
That would be a nice thing, that at a conference, if they had like a central kind of mono repo for the conference, then you could just basically
all clone, of the examples all
you
together.
Could just clone, just to kind of just go into the folder for your session and just get the examples. Boom, you're done.
Look at that. Everybody has an example. Yeah, that's where the slides. One big Git submodule party.
I'm sure. I'm sure the guys at what's his name? The PHP guys who run the PHP Tech.
Yeah.
What's his name? John
and Eric. Yeah.
John Eric. I'm sure John and Eric would love the job of putting together a mono repo, a PHP code of all these presenters and have it all coordinated and get them all like synced up.
I hope I don't think I'm speaking out of turn to say this. I'm really interested, because back in the day I was doing LV Tech stuff and all that kind of fun stuff. I'm interested in how they're doing the live stream. Because they've apparently done that themselves.
Which even though I'm not a PHP developer, I would definitely tune in to see your keynote, the streams. I'll definitely
I'll see what I can do for that.
Yeah.
But they're bouncing off of I believe it's S3.
Okay.
So it's going to go from some ATEM devices, which are the next version of what Blackmagic had when we were trying to use their big ATEMs, right? These are like these little ATEMs with buttons. I use one right here. Just day to day to do some video switching, and that's going to push to a streaming service that then I guess just pushes right to S3, because streaming, the whole point of streaming is you can pick it up halfway through it doesn't matter. You just pick it up wherever you are, you get the packets and you start figuring out and rendering whatever the video is. So apparently you can push to an S3 file that is streamable, which when you talk about, distribution and probably putting it behind AWS is a good thing. So I'm super excited to see how well that works for them. And it's just, I found it fascinating. I'm really interested to see how it works in practice, but I think the live streaming is going to be pretty cool. We have one dev on our team that's not going to be able to make it out there. So he'll be he'll be participating via the live stream. We'll try to keep him as engaged as possible. So,
wasn't there something that you wanted to talk about this week?
Yeah, well, that was I alluded to the Hypermedia in 60
seconds. Yeah, Hypermedia,
right?
because I did not, because we ended the show last week about that. And I was like, I knew about something about Hyper. That was HyperCard. I had some experience in the past.
That's something, hyperlinks,
that's something totally different, right?
Right. So,
but I don't think I have an experience with Hypermedia, so I was curious about that.
In the API world, and this is where I don't even know if I pronounce it right because I don't hear it pronounced a lot, but HADOS, which is Hypermedia as the state of Hypermedia as the engine of application state. It's all from Roy Fielding's REST dissertation years ago, right? And people throw these terms around. But I found that when I see and sit down at some Hypermedia talks, I'm like, you're missing the point. And you're trying to explain a concept, and I think you're making it feel so complex that I don't think it's useful. And Hypermedia is actually really simple. So, as I said, one talk is going to be very much live code. This other talk is very much my normal presentation style, which is kind of zoom around Prezi. It's not really Prezi, but it's that whole move over a page and see the relationship style. And to kick it off, we're talking about how we at PhoneBurner have been leveraging Hypermedia as we build APIs that serve our internal clients, right? So like our own web front end. It's not APIs that necessarily are public for everybody to use. They're just the APIs we're using to build our web application. And we're gonna talk about it. But if someone isn't familiar with Hypermedia, I wanted to give this little Hypermedia in 60 seconds kind of concept.
Here we go.
I'm looking here. Here we go. Yeah, because I'm looking at the timer on the live thing, and we've got like 5 seconds before we hit a minute mark, and that'll be a good way to see if we can do this. So, to explain Hypermedia in 60 seconds, imagine you are on Amazon. All right, and you got a whole list of products here, and you're like, I want to know more about that product. And what Amazon told you is like, oh, you want to know more about that product? Well, go to amazon.com/products and take the product ID and paste it after that, and stick that in the address bar and hit enter. You'd be like, that's kind of silly. And then you scroll down, you're like, I'm on page 1, I want to go to page 2. And there's like, it says 2, but next to 2 is like this note that says, if you want to go to page 2, look up in the address bar, there's a page equals 1. You want to make that 2. If you just want to go to the next page, then just take whatever value is there and increment it by 1, and then you'll get to the next page. And you'd be like, this is dumb. We have these things called links. Why aren't you using that? But that is exactly what we make API clients do when we don't use Hypermedia. We say, oh, this product is owned by this user. You want to know more about the user? Well, go remember what I told you the user URL was. Take this user ID, stick it in the front, and then request that. All Hypermedia is doing is saying, use a link instead. Don't give clients the IDs. Give them links so they can just follow them. That is it. That's Hypermedia.
So from my world, my mind immediately goes to routing. That sounds like a route to me.
Yeah, but don't think of it that way. From an API perspective, if you're a client consuming an API, instead of me giving you IDs and expecting you to make the link to make the next request, I'll just give you the link.
Okay, how is that link enclosed, or how is it passed?
It's in the body. It's in the body.
So it's just the body. Okay.
So instead of me saying the user ID is 1234, I'm like, no, the user link is /user/1234.
So are you alluding to?
Don't worry about that.
Then a structure, like a shape of that request that then has like a key,
and that's the thing.
As in basically URL.
Hypermedia is just saying we're going to, in a RESTful API design, is just saying I'm going to tell you what you're going to get from me. I'm going to tell you the shape, but I'm not going to tell you how to find things. I'm not going to tell you like, hey, users are under /users and products are under /. I'm not going to tell you that. I'm going to say, here's the shape of what you want. And if there's anything that this is related to, I'm going to give you a link to it. I'm not going to expect you to create those links. And that's really what a RESTful API design is leveraging Hypermedia and saying the only thing that we want to communicate between the client and server is the shape of things. Because if I was going to say, what's the most well-known Hypermedia API example? And I'll ask that. And the answer is, it's none of those API companies that may have come to mind. The most well-known Hypermedia example is RSS. It is a format that says, here's the data I'm going to give you. And should you want more information about something, you want to go to those comments, what do? You follow a link. You don't go, no, I know the comments are an example.com/comments. You don't do that because RSS doesn't know what the server is. RSS is a high-level web scale API that says anybody can implement it on any server. And the reason why that's possible is because we don't make any decisions on URI structure. We tell you, I'm gonna document what the structure of the response is, and then if you want to get more information, follow the link to the comments. I'll document what a comment response should look like, but I'm not going to make you assemble these URIs. Now, that is obvious, the value of that for RSS, because that is a web scale problem. But is there value to doing this on a smaller scale, on our scale, on where it's just our own web client using our own API? And the truth is, yeah, there's a ton of value. And if you want to know what that value is, you should get a ticket to PHP Tech and come to this talk, because that is exactly what we are going to share there.
Because it may or may not be streamed, so it might be the only place to actually find out how to efficiently use
why
a small team.
Because a lot of those concepts, well, hey, this works. This is for a web scale problem, right?
Yeah.
But is it actually practical for me to try to adopt that when I'm just building a little API to power this little single page app? And I believe, yes, from what we've done, it totally is. There's a lot of value in what it helps you eliminate from the client and what it enables on the server side. So, and that's what we'll talk about, and how we're leveraging and what we're doing is what we'll be talking about in that talk. So I'm excited to talk about that, and we'll probably talk about it more after.
So all it is just an enclosed path or URL to get more information.
Well, to get whatever you want. So we use the HAL, which is a hypertext application layer, I think is what what it stands for. We use that format, which says, all right, your API response is going to be a JSON body, and totally will document what properties you should expect there. And we do it in an open API spec. We say, here's all the properties that you should expect. HAL comes along and says, if there's an underscore links or there's an underscore embedded, that means something. Those are kind of reserved keywords. If it's an underscore link or an underscore embedded, that needs to be an object where the properties of that object are the relationship to whatever, in case of links, whatever you're linking. Yeah. So if I have a talk and I have inside the talk, there's an underscore links, there's going to more than likely be, strongly encouraged, there's going to be a rel of self, which is to be like, hey, this is me. In case you found me and you didn't know where I came from, this is the link to me. And in there may be, say, another rel that says speaker. And that may be a link to the speaker. Or it may be an array of links if for some reason this is a one-to-many relationship, where in the case of the talk that actually we'll be giving, there's two speakers, me and Joseph, one of the devs on the team. We're both giving that talk. So in that context, there would be a rel of speaker. It would be an array, and inside would be two objects that would link to me and Joseph's profiles, right? And maybe it's the track. Maybe this talk happens in a track because conferences have tracks, right? So there could be a link to the track too. And as a client, you don't have to go, oh, the track is track 1582. If I want more information about that, I think I go to /tracks. Is it /track? I don't remember which one it is. And I concatenate that in the front. Oh, I forgot the slat. No, you just follow the thing.
So could there be a downside with this pattern when it comes to performance and latency, or
because the client's making a lot of requests, right?
Well, eventually, yeah. If you have a lot of clients making a request, and if you're using like a larger data model that are passing more data back and forth,
because they're going to have to traverse these links, because that's basically
not necessarily traverse the links, but I meant like the amount of data you're passing back and forth between a request, because it sounds like you're giving more data than is really needed or initially requested, in the hopes that they're going to use that additional information.
Oh, you're saying the extra
to more
links
efficiently
that you're throwing in there?
Ask additional requests in the future. Yes, just the additional data. I know it's just text, but I'm just saying from a scale perspective, could there be a downside about?
I don't think so. Like I've not seen that, because generally speaking, the links outweigh the body of whatever you're sending, right?
So most of the cost is really just like one line of text, like for these links. But could this document have like 100 links to it?
It could if it was a collection of things.
Mm-hmm.
And it could have 100 links instead of here's the thing. It
so
could have 100.
You could take that too far. It could become an issue.
No, I don't. Well, I mean, depending on how you look at it, you could, but no, I don't think so, because there's other aspects that then solve those problems. Because when we generally think from an API, I'm going to give you a collection of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Say you want to show me all the talks in a drop-down list, right? A traditional API design, you may go ask a collection, and I shouldn't say traditional, a non-hypermedia API design. You may go ask for that collection of, well, give me all of the talks.
Yeah.
And then the API, I'm guessing, would ship you back
a list,
a bunch of data, an array that each one had a talk. And then you scratch your head and say, well, in this case, I don't care about anything other than just the talk and the name. So now I have to think about, well, how do I communicate that to the server? How do I say that I don't want all the data, because that's inefficient for me to get back all the data?
I was assuming when you made that first example, I was assuming you're only going to get back basically like the name, ID, and maybe like one or two other properties that are important for displaying that drop down and using that drop down to then relate the data somewhere else.
But how do you make that distinction? Because if I also wanted to get, then you say, oh, the collection only comes with a couple keys. But if you actually get the actual talk, it gives you all of the data that's needed for the talk, right? But now you have a client that has to understand, sometimes I have a partial version of this talk. Other times I have a full version. I need to understand the difference, especially if I'm using a reactive framework. Sometimes I'll have properties that I can bind to DOM elements. Sometimes I won't. And instead of having a very consistent, no, again, we agree upon the shape of this object, a very consistent, yes, this is a talk.
So isn't what traits solve?
Is what traits solve?
We're talking about PHP traits.
This is client side. This is client side.
No, I'm still talking about from the API, like how you request. So if you want to change the shape or change the data that you're requesting,
changing the shape on the server is actually not that difficult. It's that you put a lot of pressure on the client then, because the client has to understand, well, how do I handle, wrangle, and bind data, right, from a lightweight talk versus a full talk versus a talk that has, well, even extended data, because somehow we thought that, here's even more data that we should give you back when you ask for a talk. And then the client has to know, now I've got 3 different shapes for one thing. So there's, and the common use case is really, I just want to list the talks by name. In that case, from a Hypermedia's perspective, I'll just give you the links. I'll give you the links and I'll tell you what the title is in the link. I'll give you here's the link, here's the href for it, and here's the title that you should use to display this link. The user selects it, well, then follow that link, and then you'll get the full representation.
Okay, so you're saying so that's why the cost isn't that much, because initially it's just links.
It can be. And
then the client would then choose which additional information they want by referencing one of those elements.
But the other fun thing with HAL is there's underscore embedded. And underscore embedded allows me to add more resources. And I can say, hey, I'm going to embed some related resources right here in underscore embedded. They're going to have the same thing. They're going to be an object that the key, the properties, is the rel, the relationship. And then what you'd expect to find on the other side of that is either the object or an array of objects. So I could say, I'm not just going to give you links to the speakers. I'm actually going to embed the speakers in underscore embedded. And each one will have that entire, whatever we call a speaker resource, right? It'll be there. And we can set the client up, and this is what we're going to talk about a little bit in the talk. We can set the client up to not need to be aware of whether it's in embedded or not. Just traverse links. And if it's embedded, use what we gave you already. And now we have this scenario where from a server side, I can look and I can see, wow, look at this client. It has this traffic pattern where it requests a talk and then it immediately requests every speaker. That's inefficient, because that's saying there's 3 requests and I know what they're going to be.
Okay.
So from a server side, I can say, all right, when this specific client that I might be able to recognize by key, by whatever their API key is, when they ask me for a talk, I'm going to send them back the talk for sure, but I'm going to tuck an underscore embedded both speakers as well. And then something on that client has to be smart enough to know, hey, I want to traverse to this link. Oh, it was already embedded. I'll just use what came down. And now I've been able to optimize my traffic patterns and my traffic usage by what I observe on the server side without having to change anything on the client. As long as the client's smart enough to understand that if it's something's embedded, don't traverse the link. And that's what we'll talk about too, is we have a nice little layer that sits in between our actual JavaScript kind of view code, right? And our API that says, hey, I'm going to inspect every response that comes back. I'm going to look at embedded, and whatever's in embedded, I'm going to cache it by itself link. So if you ask me for that, I'm going to give you what I have in the cache. And now from a client standpoint, the client side developers can just wire it up and say, hey, we just traversed links. We don't care about it. And then the server can say, wow, loading this page resulted in 50 API calls. Oh, I see what you're doing. You just need me to embed this collection when you ask me for it, because you actually are going to iterate over it and you're going to pull all the resources. And then boom, we went from 50 to 2 from a server side change that didn't require someone to go under the hood and start changing things in the client side. So that's to me is a lot of the value. And this is, I guess the talk doesn't have to be an hour. I guess it can be 10 minutes, but we'll talk about how we enable all that.
I would like to see because I'm still trying to wrap my head around I think I understand more from from the API or the server side perspective than I do the client side perspective. Because like I said, I haven't used that approach. Mm-hmm. So I would actually need to see an example of that.
And the client just follows the links, right? The client doesn't have to have, and that's the nice thing too, is instead of you having kind of init your client with like, hey, here's the base URL for this resource. If you ever encounter a user ID, you know that you have to put /users in front of it. Here's the base URL for talks. When you see a talk ID, the way you get there is you throw /talks in front of it and you get there. No, we're saying, nope, you just follow the link. And the value there, it may not seem much in that we can change those links if we want to, and the client won't need to react to them. If for some reason we needed to, or it really gets highlighted in things like paging, right? And that was my other example. Can you imagine you scroll down the bottom, they're like, oh, you want to go to page 2, scroll up and change it. Why should the client know how to get to page 2? I just give it a link. I say, oh, you're in a collection. Here's the relationship for this is next. That means the next page. Follow it. And then it doesn't matter if we're doing like page and limit size, paging, or maybe we're doing cursor-based paging, where I'm saying, no, you give me the last item, because we have a very live collection here. Things are being added all the time. So you want to go to the next page, you just give me the last item from the previous page, and I'll give you the next page. Well, imagine the client having to figure that out and be like, all right, so I've got to iterate over this collection, find the ID of the last one, put that in the query param to tell you that's my last one. Is it the last one or is it the next one? I don't remember. No, just follow the link that says next page. The client shouldn't have to worry about what the server determined paging was.
I get it. Okay.
So we take a lot of complexity from the client of having to understand the implementation of the server, and we free yourself up, because if the client is simply following the next or the previous or the last or the first links to navigate around a collection and pages, well, we could say, oh, we used to use a size, page and a size to do kind of limit paging, but it is better for us to do cursor paging. All right, we'll change that in the server side. The client doesn't have to change at all. And it helps decouple a lot of things where you don't have to go, oh, yeah, well, we can support that paging on the server side, but we're going to have to update all the clients that use it too. No, you don't. Not if you're properly using links. So that is it. I mean, that was more than 60 seconds. But I think the hypermedia part is just pretending APIs should leverage the same stuff that your web pages do and say, when you want someone to ask for more information, follow a link. That's it. Just follow a link.
Give a link. Don't worry. Won't take up any money. It won't take that much. It's just text.
Not gonna take that. It's not just text. It's just text, Mark. It's just text. So, well, we've got.
Well, one thing that we could talk about next week, and you could think about this.
Okay.
Because I've been spending some time this week thinking about bottlenecks.
Oh, we missed the whole thing. We only got, what is this? 40 some seconds left.
Professionally, within your experience, maybe at your current company, where are some of the biggest bottlenecks that you see that you are always kind of having to work on throughout the year?
Well, are you going to try to solve these, and that's how you're going to become a 10x developer? Is that the thing? Is that
I think a 10x developer is they're able to spot these bottlenecks without even like thinking, and they could just, provide a solution to it.
I wasn't sure because we didn't get to talk to that. We've got 10 seconds left. Mark's going to become a 10x developer, and I don't know. Is that just? I think 10x developers just use ChatGPT.
Oh boy! Serious about the bottlenecks. That's one thing I wanted to ask you about. So, but
yeah,
you could think about that. What you can talk about from your experience or your company or something like that.
10 times bottleneck. That's what we'll do.
Well, it'll go into the fact of like, that's why I was asking questions like, oh, well, couldn't this from a transfer cost perspective, wouldn't there could be a downside, like eventually, depending upon the scale of it?
Maybe, yeah. Your API responses are generally very lightweight.
Yeah.
Just in general for web requests.
But you then you start to allude to the fact like, okay, well, maybe initially it could be, but based on what you're going to be seeing with the request, you could then optimize it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you can see this like flurry of requests and be like, oh wait, but we'll just solve that with embedded.
It makes it easier for you to optimize it on the back end because you're able to see kind of the inefficiencies that's coming from the client, and then you're able to correct that faster.
And depending on how deep you want to dig it on the back end, like you can actually one might assume you could have predictive embedding, right? Where not even human intervention. It's just like the client asks for this URL and then this URL and this URL. Okay, next time they ask for that one, I'll give them the other two. I'll just do it. I'll just be like, I think you probably wanted that.
Yeah.
And I can even, if it's a public API where you're having to authenticate with a key, I can say, oh, I'll do that kind of cached by key. And we'll learn from the patterns if we wanted to take a very automated approach to it. But the other thing we can do is we can say, all right, not every time somebody hits this one resource do they also collect these other three, but this is an internal app, and I can look at the refer and say, I know this page from the server. Like you're making a client request from a particular page of my application. I know exactly what you're going to ask for. So I can optimize it for a particular like Vue app or React app on a page. I know what your traffic pattern is. I'll just give you everything I think you're going to need in one request. And so that solves, because that's usually, people aren't usually concerned about, oh, you added 3 links or 4 links to the top of this API resource. And they're not usually worried about the bandwidth. They're worried about the amount of requests, because request equals time. Every request is another request response cycle. There's lag, there's delay. So they're like, why is it taking me 15 API requests to get the root of your API and then ask for a collection and then ask for 3 other things? It's like, all right, yeah, we can solve that though. We can solve it, and we can solve that if you're disciplined and you don't make the client aware of the embedded and they treat it as optional as they should, then you can do all that server side. Where sometimes it gets really complex is when people start thinking embedded is something, oh yeah, we always embed this in the user resource. Okay, now clients expect it to be there, and you didn't actually do anything that's helps with optimization. You just made your user resource bigger. It will always include another resource. Well, that's not helpful. Because what if your user resource is embedded in something else? Oh yeah, now the talk has a user resource in it because that's who the speaker is, and the user resource has something else in it because that's always embedded there. And it's like, oh no, now you've done it. Now you've made the world's largest object graph, and one request is going to pull down your database, and that's no good either. So,
one thing we also talk about too in the future: how does your team, because you do a lot with Vue now? Right?
I don't, but the team does. Yeah,
your team does. Yeah. So, but when you have team discussions about when something like should be like, okay, so how much percentage wise is your client side web apps considered client side applications that'd be rendered on the client? So strictly like a Vue or JavaScript application, and then how much would be like server side generated? Like where the HTML would actually be returned by the browser from the server.
Yeah.
So interesting kind of conversation like that could happen in fact of like, when choices are made of putting those requests on the client rather than generating that on the server and being passed to the client.
Yeah. That'd be an interesting conversation.
So think about that. So that's also something I was thinking about too, like seeing how the world is moving back to the PHP model in a sense.
Oh, server side render stuff.
Yeah. And how they're still, and in the JavaScript world is actually pretty interesting too, because then there's also issues of like, well, do JavaScript developers really know where it's being rendered? So if you're passing certain data,
do they need to?
Do they need to, or from a security standpoint? You know,
Oh,
think about
right. Yeah, are you considering where it's being rendered?
Yeah. So that's an interesting thing now that I'm getting back into doing it from, actually, no, not getting back to, but getting back to server-side rendering, but doing it from a JavaScript perspective now. Because traditionally, I was using PHP, Ruby, Python. Those are just the languages I was using for server-side. Now doing it from JavaScript perspective, there's a lot of interesting things you have to think about.
All right, those of you still watching, because you're watching